Assalamu alaikum students, welcome back to ENG503. This is your prose 2 paper and we have been discussing a number of things in this paper. This subject is divided, you can say, into 2 halves. In the first half we're going to be doing the travelogue of Jonathan Swift, that is Gulliver's Travels, and let me remind you here that we will not be doing the whole book because it's a very thick book, and if to do it in detail would probably need a whole module to itself. So what I'm going to do is introduce you to one of the voyages that Gulliver undertakes into what Jonathan Swift has called the remote nations of the world. And if you recall the very first lectures that I delivered, I told you that Swift is emphasizing the people-to-people contact. He talks about remote nations of the world. He doesn't talk about remote countries. And so you need to keep this in mind when you are studying Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels. The book that we started off with is the voyage into the land of the Lilliputians, that is the small people, the little people. And in this land, Gulliver feels that he is a giant. So the story that we have studied up to this point starts with Gulliver's ship being broken up. Gulliver swims to shore and finds himself in the land of the Lilliputians. And these Lilliputians are very small. They're smaller than the pygmy tribes of Africa. And the tallest man amongst them is not more than 6 inches. So the majority of people that you're dealing with are between 5 feet and 5.5 feet. 5.5 inches, mind you. I'm talking about our heights, our normal heights, especially for women, are between 5 feet and 5 feet, maybe 5 inches. But for the Lilliputians, the height is 5 inches to 5.5 inches. So the same height that we have in feet, the Lilliputians have in inches. And slowly and gradually, Gulliver develops a kind of relationship with the emperor of Lilliput as well as the general public. In the beginning, of course, Gulliver is a kind of is treated as a giant and as a monstrosity, as something that is worth looking at but which should be feared. But with the passage of days and weeks, the people come to realize that Gulliver does not mean them any harm. And Gulliver also starts to sort of get a kind of bond that is established with the Lilliputians. And the part where we wound up the last lecture, Gulliver had told us and explained in great detail how he got his freedom. He had written an application to the emperor, and in return the emperor had drawn up a document in which, of course, the admiral of the realm played a very important role. He was about the only one in the emperor's council who was against Gulliver being set free. And finally the emperor made the decision that Gulliver would be set free, but reldresal, this is the name of the admiral of the realm, Reldresal said that he was going to insert certain points. So he has inserted certain articles according to which Gulliver will help them if they are attacked by the enemy. And you need to remember that for the Lilliputians, the enemy is always the Blefuscudians. It is never anyone else, because in their world, in their history and geography books, the only other power that exists is the island of Blefuscu. You have the island of Lilliput on one hand and the island of Blefuscu on the other. So the articles that Reldresal, the admiral of the realm, draws up for Gulliver to see is one of the points that are included is that he will help them against their enemies. Another point is that whenever he wants to visit the city, the metropolis, he will give advance notice so that people can go into their houses and not be sort of trampled, not come underfoot. One of the other articles that has been mentioned is that Gulliver, when he wants to lie down, will not lie down in a meadow of grass or in the cornfields. And this condition is a very intelligent condition, because if Gulliver lies down in a meadow, the grass will be flattened. If he lies down in a cornfield, the corn will be flattened and the crop will be destroyed. So there are some very intelligent points that have been included in this document. Once Gulliver swears to abide by whatever he has signed to, he is set free, and that means that the chains with which he has been tied down are removed. What we are going to see today is how Gulliver acts when he is finally given his freedom. So today's lecture is going to comprise of descriptions that Gulliver gives of the metropolis or the capital city and its surrounding areas, and he's also going to tell us how he feels now that he has been set free. All right, so let's see today what Gulliver wants us to see. We're going to experience everything through the eyes of Gulliver. The first request I made, Gulliver says, was that I might have license to see Mildendo, the metropolis, which the emperor easily granted me. So Gulliver is asking for things which are not very difficult to grant, but with a special charge to do no hurt either to the inhabitants or their houses. So one of the instructions that is given to Gulliver, because he's so huge and the Lilliputians are so small, is that he will not harm anyone, he will not hurt anyone. You see, Gulliver is so huge compared to the Lilliputians that if he wants, he can destroy their houses, and he just has to put his foot on one of the houses and the house will collapse. So he is given special instructions that he is not to harm either the inhabitants of Lilliput or their houses. And of course, when he is going to visit the house, the people are going to be warned in time so that they can go into their houses and not come out and not run the risk of being endangered. So what Gulliver does is that he visits the town, he visits Mildendo, and we're going to see how he brings about this visit, and also what he sees in the town. So let us see what the city of Mildendo is like. The wall which encompassed it is 2.5 feet high. Now 2.5 feet is not much for Gulliver, but it's very high for the Lilliputians, and at least 11 inches broad. Now that is a very thick wall. So the wall is about this thick, so that a coach and horses may be driven very safely around it. So you could have horses driving around on the wall. It's so thick, and it is flanked with strong towers at 10 feet distance. Now you have to see all these measurements from the perspective of the Lilliputians. I stepped over the great western gate and passed very gently and sidling through the two principal streets. Now there are two principal streets which you would probably call avenues, and these two streets Gulliver walks through because they are the only ones, let's say, wide enough for Gulliver to be able to walk. So he steps over the surrounding wall of the city, and then he passes sidling into the principal streets. He can't take big steps, because he's going to destroy everything there. And you have evidence of this in the fact that Gulliver says, I was wearing only my short waistcoat. I couldn't afford to wear my long coat because that would have destroyed the houses and the trees. I walked with the utmost circumspection to avoid treading on any stragglers who might remain in the streets, although the orders were very strict. So he walks very slowly and very, very carefully. The garret windows and tops of houses were so crowded with spectators that I thought in all my travels I had not seen a more populous place. So all those different parts of the world that Gulliver has visited, he says, I had never seen so many people together in one place as those that gathered to see me. And they were at safe distances. You see, they didn't come out on the road, but they were in the balconies and windows of houses. They did want to see the man mounted, but they also didn't want to get killed doing it. So they're playing very safe, and they stand in the balconies, they stand in the windows, but they still want to see the man mounted walking by. The city is an exact square, each side of the wall being 500 feet long. And that's a great distance for the Lilliputians. The two great streets which run across and divided into 4 quarters are 5 feet wide. Again, 5 feet wide is very, very wide for the Lilliputians. It's about it's about 10 times their height. So this is like saying that you have roads that are, if you take the average height to be 6 feet, then it would be streets that are 30 feet wide. So very wide streets. The lanes and alleys, which I could not enter but only view them as I passed, are from 12 to 18 inches. So very good measurements for the kind of city that has been planned out. It's a very well planned and a very well thought out city. And Gulliver is full of admiration for the planning of the city. The town is capable of holding 500,000 people, so a big city. The houses are from 3 to 5 stories, the shops and markets well provided. So Mildendo lacks nothing at all. Mildendo is self-sufficient, and anything that you might need in the way of food and clothing is very readily available. The emperor's palace is in the center of the city where the two great streets meet. Okay, so this is dead center and this is where the emperor has his palace. And it is 20 feet from the buildings. So very, very security conscious. I had His Majesty's permission to step over the wall, and the space being so wide between that and the palace, I could easily view it on every side. So Gulliver does not have any problem looking over the walls because he is so tall and these walls are not very high. The outward court is a square of 40 feet and includes two other courts. In the inmost are the royal apartments, which I was very desirous to see, but found it extremely difficult, for the great gates from one square into another were but 18 inches high and 7 inches wide. Now this is something that the Lilliputians had not thought of when they planned the city. But now that they have Gulliver, they have to see what they can provide for him. The buildings of the outer court were at least 5 feet high. It was impossible for me to stride over them. Now he comes into the palace, which has a wall that is 2.5 feet high. But when it comes to double that height, then Gulliver finds out that he just cannot do it. At the same time, the emperor had a great desire that I should see the magnificence of his palace. So the emperor also wanted to show off. But he couldn't do that because in 3 days, they cut down the largest trees so that he would be able to access those apartments, but he was not able to do that. But what he did do was that out of the trees that were cut down in his honor, he made 2 stools which were 3 feet high and which were strong enough to carry his weight. So let's see how he's going to use these 2 stools. What he does is, because of this wall that is 2.5 feet high, he stands on one of the stools, puts the other stool inside the wall, and instead of going across the wall, he travels from one stool to another stool. So it's not very difficult for him, and it's very convenient because he is traveling far above the ground. It's only when he's walking on the ground, when he's moving about on the ground, that the inhabitants are fearful, and therefore their emperor is afraid. But here it's a very safe procedure, and that is the procedure that Gulliver follows. And when the emperor wants to show off his wife and children and the kind of palace he lives in, he tells Gulliver to lie down so that Gulliver can peep into those rooms and see the splendid apartments that the royalty lives in. He also sees the empress and the young princes, and he realizes that they have their own lodgings or their own rooms. Her Imperial Majesty was pleased to smile very graciously upon me and gave me out of the window her hand to kiss. So he's granted an audience by the Empress. But I shall not anticipate the reader with further descriptions of this kind, so he realizes that these descriptions are getting to be a bit too much. I know what I've been through it also, so I think he's going a little too much into detail. And Gulliver says that I am going to write about these details in another book, but I am not going to tell you what that book is all about. So Gulliver gives reference to another work he says that he is working on, and in which he is going to give the history of the empire of Lilliput, and he's also going to discuss the lives of different princes or different rulers of Lilliput. He's going to give an account of the wars and politics. He's going to discuss everything in that book. But for now, he says, bear with me, because there are certain details that that I cannot give in this book, but which I will provide you with in the next book. And he says that he's going to describe the animals, the plants, the human beings, their manners and customs, all these things he's going to describe. What he wants to do right now is to relate such events and transactions as happened to the public or to myself during a residence of about 9 months in that empire. So for now, he's only interested in giving you an account of Lilliput and whatever he encountered there. So he's only going to be talking about events that actually happened to him, and not a lot of detail about what the city was like and what the countryside was like, etc., etc. One morning, about a fortnight after I had obtained my liberty, reldresal, principal secretary for private affairs, came to my house, attended only by one servant. He ordered his coach to wait at a distance and desired I would give him an hour's audience. So this is the person who has been giving Gulliver a sort of tough time. He is secretary for private affairs, and he comes to Gulliver's house. Remember, that is the temple in which nobody would go to pray, and that is Gulliver's house. So reldresal comes to him and says, I have something to talk to you about. Gulliver says, well, fine, Gulliver doesn't have any work to do. And he says, okay, what I'll do is I will lie down so that you can talk in my ear and I will understand you. But he said, no, you pick me up and you hold me in your hand, and for me that is more comfortable. So Gulliver does that, and reldresal starts off and he says that I worked very hard for your freedom, and I was responsible, and I really wanted you to be free. And he's also trying to tell Gulliver that if it had not been for reldresal, Gulliver never would have been set free so early, because he says that we are very careful of foreigners. There are two reasons why we are careful with foreigners. One is a violent faction at home, that is dissension or disagreement between the different parties that govern Lilliput. And the other is the danger of an invasion, and this is where Blefuscudians come in. And Reldresal calls the Blefuscardians a most potent enemy. As for the first, you are to understand that for about 70 moons past, there have been two struggling parties in this empire, and this is really, really very funny. You know, you need to concentrate on this, and it will give you an idea of the kind of arguments that political parties have and the kind of issues that are made out of non-issues. Something very small, it is blown out of all proportion until they say, well, whatever you say, we disagree with. So he says that as far as politics is concerned, there are two parties in Lilliput, the Tramexan and the Slamexan. Think of the words and the names that Gulliver is giving to everyone. These are, you know, he makes up these words. You will not find them anywhere else. And for those of you who are into reading Harry Potter or Tolkien or any of the writers who are dealing with fantasy literature, you will see that this is something that's been produced in the 21st century. But back in the 18th century also, fantasy literature was being produced by someone like Jonathan Swift. So Swift again gives us his comments of life at court through presentation of the court and the governmental setup in Lilliput. So Reldresal says that, you know, we have these two parties that and they have the name of Tramexan and Slamexan, and they have these names given to them because of the height of the heel. Those who wear high-heeled shoes belong to one party, and those that wear low-heeled shoes, they belong to another party. Of course, Swift is talking about the Whigs and the Tories, and the fact that there was a lot of argument always going on between these two parties. So he says that these two parties, they believe that high heels are agreeable to our constitutions, and low heels are not. But he says His Majesty has determined to make use only of low heels in the administration of the government and all offices in the gift of the crown, as you cannot but observe, and particularly that His Majesty's imperial heels are lower at least by a drur than any of his court. Okay. Now, as far as the king is concerned, those who wear high heels are the nobility. But as far as the administration is concerned, the king favors those who wear low heels. So this would be people who are not noble but who are otherwise very highly qualified, and so great is their difference of opinion that they will neither eat nor drink nor talk with each other. So they don't even like to be in the same place. That is the kind of argument that they have. We compute the Tramexan or high heels to exceed us in number. So the Tramexans are greater in number than the Slamexans. We apprehend His Imperial Highness, the heir to the crown, to have some tendency towards the high heels. And it's very strange. The emperor favors high heels in his court, low heels for work that has to be done. The heir to the crown is in between these two parties. And it's rather silly because he says that one of his heels is higher than the other, and this gives him a hobble in his gait. Now, if you have one shoe with a high heel and another with a low heel, you're not going to be able to walk properly. You're going to be going, hobbling, as Swift calls it. So in the midst of this intestine disquiets, we are threatened with an invasion from the island of Blefuscu. So this is the enemy coming in. They already have the enemy within, that is the two political parties. They are constantly fighting with each other. And the only difference between them is that one wears high-heeled shoes and the other wears low-heeled shoes. And then he says the other threat that we have is an invasion from the island of Blefuscu. And Reldresal calls Blefuscu almost as large and powerful as Lilliput. Remember, he doesn't say it's a very large and powerful country or it's a very powerful emperor. He says almost as large as Lilliput. So Reldresal, being a Lilliputian himself, thinks that Lilliput is the most powerful kingdom on earth, and the only other kingdom that is perhaps as powerful is that of Blefuscu. Now, I know that you have never heard the name of Blefuscu. I have never heard the name of Lilliput. I did read about it, but I know it does not exist in this world. But these are the names that Swift has given to these two empires, and these are the names that we have to use. So he says that these are the problems of Lilliput. Now, one interesting thing that Reldresal talks about here is that he says, we have heard you affirm that there are other kingdoms and states in the world inhabited by human creatures as large as yourself, but our philosophers are in much doubt and would rather conjecture that you dropped from the moon or one of the stars, because it is certain that 100 mortals of your bulk would in a short time destroy all the fruits and cattle of His Majesty's dominion. Okay, let's go back a bit. So you have Lilliput, you have Blefuscu, and Reldresal, the Secretary for Private Affairs, says, I know you say that there are other human beings. You say that there is another world that is inhabited by human beings as large as you. But our philosophers, the Lilliputians, say that there is no truth in what Gulliver is saying. That people of Gulliver's size do not exist, and that he has dropped from the stars. He is an alien. He is an extraterrestrial creature. He has come in a UFO. So all these ideas, Reldresal says, those are acceptable. But we cannot accept when you say that there are other worlds and these worlds are inhabited by people or by human beings of your size. So the Lilliputians refuse to believe that there are other worlds. Now, this is one way that Swift has of telling us that people who do not believe that Gulliver actually traveled and met these other nations of the world, they run the risk of having their own existence doubted. For example, I am told that I have students sitting on the other side of the camera. I have not seen these students, so I say that these students do not exist, and that I am just speaking to the camera. Now, if I say that these students or this class does not exist, you can also say that I do not exist. You understand? So, as far as the Lilliputians are concerned, Gulliver has told them that there are other countries where human beings of Gulliver's size exist. But the Lilliputians don't want to believe it, and since they don't want to believe it, they don't believe that any other country exists where human beings are Gulliver's size. Because he says that if you had even 100 men of your size, all the food in the world would be finished. Now, he says this because for Lilliputians, the world consists of Lilliput and Blefuscu. And if the world consists of Lilliput and Blefuscu, then yes, 100 people of Gulliver's size would wipe out all the food and drink that the Lilliputians and Blefuscudians have managed to gather together. And besides, he says, our histories of 6,000 moons make no mention of any other regions than the two great empires of Lilliput and Blefuscu. So that's the kind of history that has been written. It does not mention any country outside of Lilliput and Blefuscu. So he says that these two powers, that is Lilliput and Blefuscu, have been engaged in a most obstinate war for 6 and 30 moons past, so about 3 years of our time. It began upon the following occasion. Okay, and now you're going to see where the Lilliputians differ from the Blefuscudians. It is allowed on all hands that the primitive way of breaking eggs before we eat them was upon the larger end. So if this is an egg and this is the bigger side, this is the tip. He says that the primitive way, the savage way of breaking the end was the larger end. But His present Majesty's grandfather, while he was a boy, going to eat an egg and breaking it according to the ancient practice, happened to cut one of his fingers, whereupon the emperor, his father, published an edict commanding all his subjects upon great penalties to break the smaller end of their eggs. The people so highly resented this law that our histories tell us there have been 6 rebellions raised on that account, wherein one emperor lost his life and another his crown. Okay, now I ask you, what is there to argue about in which side of the egg you're going to break? Now this is more or less the shape of an egg. So whether you break the egg from this end or this end, what difference does it make? According to Gulliver, a lot. Because he says that one of the princes, when he was having an egg, he used the ancient way of breaking the egg from the big side, and he cut his finger. So what happened is, a finger wound is very small, it's very unimportant, but because it was a prince who did it, the emperor issued an order. And here again Swift is telling us that this is not the work of kings. The work of kings is to make sure that the nation is steered in the right direction, that the nation is taken in the right direction. But according to Swift and according to Gulliver, it was something that was very important. And when it happens to the prince that he accidentally injured his finger, the emperor, his father, gave commands that no one was to break the egg from the big end, and that if anybody was caught doing this, there would be very, very strict penalty. And this thing blew out of all proportions, so that the history of Lilliput reveals that at least 6 times people rebelled against breaking the egg on the little side. So he says there have been 6 rebellions. 1 emperor lost his life and another his crown. That is, he was sent out of the country. These civil commotions were constantly fomented by the emperors of Blefuscu, and when they were quelled, the exiles always fled to Blefuscu. So Blefuscu is twice notorious. 1, because they are enemies of Lilliput. 2, because those people who rebel against the government in Lilliput, they go and they find refuge in Blefuscu, and the Blefuscudians welcome them. They give them a very warm welcome for the simple reason that they want information and knowledge about Lilliput, and this is one way that they can get it, by questioning, by interrogating, by investigating these Lilliputians who cross over. It is computed that 11,000 persons have at several times suffered death. So there have been 11,000 casualties between the big enders and the little enders. And people have suffered death because they will not compromise. There is no way that they will reach a compromise on whether it should be broken at the little end or at the big end. Many hundred large volumes have been published upon this controversy, but the books of the big endians have been long forbidden, and the whole party rendered incapable by law of holding employments. So this is how strong their animosities, this is how strong their hatred is. They just cannot bear each other. So books written by big endians are banned, and the whole thing has become an issue, and that is how Swift succeeds in making an issue out of a non-issue. So the emperor of Lilliput has said that those who break their eggs at the big end are not to be given any employment in Lilliput. That is how strictly they are following this argument, whether to break the egg at the little end or the big end. What difference does it make? This is how political parties blow things out of all proportion. And Swift, in giving us this example of the Tramic sounds and the Islamic sounds, and then giving us the example of the feud between Lilliput and Blefuscu, he's trying to make us realize that these are things that are happening in the world, and instead of paying attention to the big things, to issues that really matter, political parties are focusing on these tiny things, these unimportant, insignificant things. During the course of these troubles, Swift says, the emperors of Blefuscu did frequently expostulate by their ambassadors, accusing us of making a schism in the religion. So now the Blefuscardians have gone so far that they accuse Lilliputians of breaking away from the religion. Now, the argument or the contention between the Lilliputians and the Blefuscardians is political. They both have the same religion. So, Lilliputians, by bringing up this issue of the big enders and the little endians, are actually, according to the emperor of Blefuscu, they are actually bringing about a break in the religion by offending against a fundamental doctrine of our great prophet Lustrog in the 54th chapter of the Blundikral. So they give reference and they say, you know, by doing this, the emperor of Lilliput is doing something that our holy book, our sacred book, does not allow us. So Swift brings in religion because you have to remember that Jonathan Swift was had a degree in divinity. He was a doctor of divinity. He had studied Christianity in detail, and so he could write about matters pertaining to religion also. So he says that, you know, this is something that is very, very serious. You cannot really ignore it. So Gulliver goes on to say that this is thought to be a mere strain upon the text, for the words are these. And then he quotes from this sacred book that is called the Blundikral, and in the 54th chapter of the Blundikral, it is said that all true believers break their eggs at the convenient end. See how confusing and how vague the text is. When you say you break it at the convenient end, it can be either side. It can be the big end, it can also be the little end. And which is the convenient end seems, in my humble opinion, to be left to every man's conscience, or at least in the power of the chief magistrate to determine. So maybe the law should come in, because the Blundikral says in the 54th chapter that all true believers, that is believers of Blundikral, break their eggs at the convenient end. So whether it is the big end or the little end, it doesn't really make any difference. But it does to the Lilliputians. So the big Indian exiles have found so much credit in the Emperor of in the Emperor of Blefuscu's court, and so much private assistance and encouragement from their party here at home, that a bloody war has been carried on between the two empires for 36 moons. 6 and 30, 36 months. 36 months is what? 3 years. So for the last 3 years, Blefuscu and Lilliput have been fighting a bloody war over which end of the egg is to be broken. And the loss has been great. And then Gulliver goes on to enumerate the loss, and he says 40 capital ships have been lost, a much greater number of smaller vessels, together with 30,000 of our best seamen. So 30,000 seamen in 3 years. Any army, any navy or air force would collapse utterly if you were to take 30,000 of them away from work and you put them in a place where they cannot contribute. Remember, the Emperor of Lilliput says, I will not give jobs to those who disobey my express command. So the damage received by the enemy, that is the Blefuscardians, we don't know how much that is, but we assume that it is greater than ours. However, they now have equipped a numerous fleet and are just preparing to make a descent upon us, and His Imperial Majesty, placing great confidence in your valor and strength, has commanded me to lay this account of his affairs before you. So, you see, this is how they are conducting their, what you would call, foreign relations. Lilliput and Blefuscu, they have been at war for 36 moons or 3 years on this issue, that is of which side of the egg should be broken. And Reldresal continues and he says, now they have equipped a numerous fleet and are just preparing to make a descent upon us, and His Imperial Majesty, placing great confidence in your valor and strength, has commanded me to lay this account of his affairs before you. So what the king is doing is, he has sent Reldresal to Gulliver with an offer, not just an offer, with the plea, with the request, the most humble request, that Gulliver help them in this war. For 3 years, Blefuscardians and Lilliputians have been fighting each other, and they have been fighting to decide which end of the egg should be broken. And now he says, after 3 years, Lilliputians have come to know that the Blefuscardians are again preparing to invade us. They have equipped a numerous fleet and are just preparing to make a descent upon us. So once more, Lilliput and Blefuscu are at war because they cannot decide which end of the egg should be broken. I desired the secretary to present my humble duty to the emperor and to let him know that I thought it would not become me, who was a foreigner, to interfere with parties, but I was ready with the hazard of my life to defend his person and state against all invaders. So Gulliver is a very intelligent and a very sane and sensible human being. After all, he has studied so many things, he's been all over the world. So he says, you know, I'm a foreigner. I cannot interfere in this war because it is between Lilliput and Blefuscu. I am neither a Lilliputian nor am I a Blefuscardian. So if I take sides, it is not right. So Gulliver is sort of trying to excuse himself from participating in the war, because he says it's not fair. With me on your side, you will definitely win, but I don't know whether the Blefuscardians are true or you. So in order to sort of decide that, they plan to launch a full-scale invasion of Lilliput. Now before we wind up, let me just sum up very quickly what we have done for today. We're gaining a little more speed and we are going to speed up our lectures still more in the coming days and the coming weeks, because there's a lot that needs to get done, and I need to introduce you to short stories also. So very quickly, to recap what we have done today, Gulliver is given his liberty, and at the cost of certain favors that are now being asked of Gulliver. One of these articles says that he will not go into the city unless he gives prior notice. Another says that he will not lie down in a field because he'll destroy the crops, etc., etc. So when Gulliver gets his liberty, the first thing that he does is he requests the emperor to let him see the metropolis from the inside. Now the name of the metropolis is Mildendo. It is the capital city of Lilliput. So the emperor consents. The emperor says, I have absolutely no objection to your taking a tour of Mildendo, but you've got to be very careful about the people there. You have to be careful about the houses there. Please don't destroy the houses. Please don't kill any of our people. You have to be very careful. We want you to walk and to see what the city is like, but you've got to be very careful that you don't harm the people or the buildings. So what Gulliver does is he enters Mildendo and he says that I entered with a lot of difficulty, because remember the gate is not as high as Gulliver, so he has to kind of bend over in order to enter the city. But once he enters the city, he wants to see the imperial palace. He wants to see the empress. He wants to see what the different rooms of the palace are like. But he cannot do that because he is very tall and the palace is very small. So what he does is that he sort of goes through the principal streets. He is not allowed to go out into the side streets because, for one thing, they're not wide enough, and for another thing, it would be very dangerous for Gulliver to go into the side streets, even if his size and height could allow him to. So what he does is he just looks at the imperial palace. The wall is 2.5 feet. It's the entire city of Mildendo is circled by a wall that is 11 inches thick, and this thickness is so that a coach and horses can ride across the wall. So coming back to Gulliver's visit and his glimpse of the palace, Gulliver makes 2 stools. He goes out, he gets wood for it, and he makes 2 stools, one of which he places outside the imperial palace wall, and the other he climbs up onto it and he puts the other stool inside. So that what he has to do is go from one stool to another, and once he has gone to the second stool, he picks up the first one and he puts it in a different place. So that way he's not destroying the crops or the grass, and he also manages to see the imperial palace everybody comes out onto the balconies, they open up the doors, and he can just look inside, and he can see what the different people are doing. Now, a fortnight after Gulliver gets his liberty, Reldresal, who is the Secretary for Private Affairs, comes to him and gives him a message from the king, which is that the Blefuscardians are planning an invasion, and the Lilliputian emperor goes or sends his messenger to Gulliver to help them out. But Gulliver says that, you know, I'm a foreigner, and because I am neither Lilliputian nor Blefuscardian, therefore I cannot really interfere in internal matters of a country. So he makes this as a sort of excuse to show that he's a foreigner and he should not be interfering in other in another country's affairs, because this is between Lilliput and Blefuscu. So with this war going on between these two islands, he doesn't think that it is right for him to interfere in the affairs of another country. But as far as defending his person is concerned, he says, if the person of the emperor is threatened, then I will do everything that is that is in me to save him, to protect him. So he will defend them against invaders, but he will not go out of his way to go and destroy the fleet that the Blefuscardians are arming for this invasion. That is enough for today. We'll do some more in the next lecture. Thank you very much for being very patient, and Allah Hafiz.